Wyatt Teller just walked out of the Cleveland Browns facility and he's never coming back. And the way it happened is going to put Jimmy Haslam under a level of scrutiny and criticism that could actually threaten his ownership of the franchise. This wasn't a normal contract dispute. This wasn't a trade. This wasn't mutual. Teller, one of the best offensive guards in the entire NFL, a Pro Bowler who's been the anchor of Cleveland's offensive line for years, just told the Browns organization to go to hell and left. And according to sources who witnessed what triggered this explosive departure, it involved a confrontation with Jimmy Haslam that was so ugly, so personal, and so revealing of everything that's wrong with how Haslam runs this franchise that multiple people in the building are now talking to reporters, talking to the NFL league office, and talking to attorneys about what they saw and heard. The specific words Haslam said to Teller, the accusations he made, the way he treated a player who's given everything to Cleveland, it's all being described as abusive, unprofessional, and potentially actionable. And the NFL world's reaction to Teller leaving isn't sympathy for the Browns losing a great player. It's rage at Haslam for driving away yet another star, and growing calls from fans, media, and even other NFL owners for the league to step in and force Haslam to sell the team before he destroys it completely. It started with a meeting that Wyatt Teller thought was going to be about his contract extension. The Browns and Teller's agent had been negotiating for weeks about a new deal that would keep Teller in Cleveland through his prime years and pay him like the elite guard he's proven to be. Teller, who's been nothing but professional and productive since arriving in Cleveland via trade from Buffalo in 2019, was optimistic that a deal would get done because the conversations had been positive and the numbers being discussed were fair for both sides. So when Teller was called into a meeting at the Browns facility on the morning of February 19th, he arrived expecting to hear that the contract was finalized or close to it. But when Teller walked into the conference room, he immediately knew something was wrong because Jimmy Haslam was there, which was unusual for a contract negotiation meeting, and Andrew Berry looked uncomfortable in a way that suggested this wasn't going to be the conversation Teller expected. According to sources who were present for what happened next, Haslam started the meeting by telling Teller that the Browns had decided not to extend his contract at the numbers that had been discussed, that the team was going in a different direction with the offensive line, and that Teller should prepare for the possibility that he might not be in Cleveland long term. Teller, according to sources, was stunned because this was completely contrary to what his agent had been told just days earlier when negotiations seemed to be progressing well. Teller reportedly asked Haslam directly what changed and why he was just now finding out that the deal was off the table. And that's when, according to sources, Haslam said something that immediately turned the meeting toxic and set off the chain of events that led to Teller walking out. Haslam, according to multiple sources who were present, told Teller that the Browns had been reviewing the offensive line's performance and had concerns about whether Teller was still playing at a level that justified the kind of contract he was asking for, and that the team needed to see improvement before committing to a long-term deal. That statement, according to sources, was both factually wrong and personally insulting to Teller, who just made the Pro Bowl for the third time in 4 years and who by every objective measure is one of the most consistent and dominant guards in the NFL. Teller, according to sources, immediately pushed back and pointed out that he'd graded as one of the top guards in football by every analytics service, that the Browns' running game success was directly attributable to his blocking, and that questioning his performance was absurd given the evidence. But instead of backing down or clarifying, Haslam, according to sources, doubled down in a way that sources describe as shockingly confrontational and disrespectful. Haslam allegedly told Teller that stats and grades don't tell the whole story, that the coaches had raised concerns about Teller's effort level and commitment, and that before the Browns invested more money in him, they needed to see that he was still hungry and motivated, rather than just collecting paychecks. That accusation, that implication that Teller wasn't giving maximum effort despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, was what sources say pushed this meeting past the point of no return. Teller, according to sources, stood up and told Haslam that he'd never been disrespected like this in his entire career, that everything Haslam just said was a lie, and that if the Browns didn't want him, he didn't want to be there. Andrew Berry, according to sources, tried to intervene and calm the situation down, telling Teller that there were misunderstandings and that they could work through this. But Teller, according to sources, was done listening. He told Haslam and Berry that he was leaving and that his agent would be in contact about what happens next, and then he walked out of the meeting and out of the building.
Within minutes, according to sources, Teller was on the phone with his agent telling him what just happened and instructing him to request a trade immediately. The agent, according to sources, was shocked because as recently as the day before, he'd been having productive conversations with Brown's executives about finalizing the contract extension. The sudden shift from near agreement to hostile confrontation made no sense from a football perspective, which led the agent to start asking questions about what was really going on and why Haslam had torpedoed the deal so aggressively. And what the agent discovered through his own sources and through conversations with people inside the Browns organization, according to sources familiar with what he learned, is that this wasn't about football at all. This was about money and about Haslam's ongoing financial crisis related to the Deshaun Watson contract disaster. According to sources, the Browns are in such dire salary cap trouble because of Watson's contract that Haslam personally intervened in the Teller extension negotiations and demanded that the deal be restructured to cost significantly less in the short term, even if it meant paying more in the long term or losing Teller entirely. Andrew Berry, according to sources, tried to explain to Haslam that Teller's market value was well established and that trying to get him to take below-market money would backfire. But Haslam reportedly overruled Berry and told him to present a low-ball offer to Teller and see if he'd accept it out of loyalty to Cleveland. Berry, according to sources, did what he was told, but wasn't surprised when Teller's agent rejected the low-ball offer. What Berry didn't expect, according to sources, was that Haslam would then personally get involved and try to pressure Teller directly by questioning his performance and commitment, which is exactly what Haslam did in that meeting. The reaction inside the Browns organization to Teller's departure has been a combination of shock, anger, and resignation. Shock because Teller is widely respected throughout the building as one of the hardest workers and best teammates on the roster. Anger because everyone knows that losing Teller makes the offensive line significantly worse and puts more pressure on whoever plays quarterback, whether that's Deshaun Watson, Malik Willis, or eventually Shedeur Sanders. And resignation because this is exactly the kind of dysfunction that's defined the Browns under Haslam's ownership for 14 years, driving away good players through organizational incompetence and owner meddling. According to sources, multiple players reached out to Teller after hearing he'd left, expressing support and frustration that the organization treated him this way. Myles Garrett, according to sources, was particularly upset and told people close to him that watching another elite player get driven away by ownership's dysfunction is making him reconsider whether he can stay in Cleveland long term. Todd Monken, who as head coach relies on having a strong offensive line to protect his quarterbacks and create running lanes, was reportedly blindsided by what happened with Teller because nobody from ownership had told him that the contract extension was falling apart or that Haslam was planning to confront Teller directly. According to sources, Monken only found out about the meeting and Teller's departure when Berry called him to explain what had happened, and Monken's reaction was reportedly a combination of anger at not being kept in the loop and frustration that ownership continues to interfere in football matters despite promises to stay out of the way.
Sources say Munkin immediately called Haslam and demanded to know why he wasn't consulted before Haslam had that meeting with Teller. And that conversation, according to sources, was tense and unproductive, with Haslam defending his right to be involved in contract discussions, and Munkin arguing that involving himself the way he did undermined the entire organizational structure. The NFL world's reaction to Wyatt Teller leaving Cleveland has been swift, brutal, and almost universally critical of Jimmy Haslam. Within hours of the news breaking, social media exploded with former players, analysts, and fans condemning Haslam for driving away another star player through incompetence and meddling. The hashtag #SellTheBrowns, which has trended multiple times over the past few weeks, trended again and reached even higher engagement than before. Multiple prominent NFL analysts went on air to say that Haslam is the worst owner in professional sports and that the league should force him to sell the team for the good of the franchise and the city of Cleveland. Even some current NFL players from other teams posted messages supporting Teller and criticizing the Browns' organizational dysfunction, which is notable because players typically avoid publicly criticizing other teams' ownership. The most significant reaction, according to sources, is coming from other NFL owners who are increasingly uncomfortable with how the Browns' situation is playing out publicly and the negative attention it's bringing to the league. According to sources with knowledge of recent conversations among owners, there's growing sentiment that Haslam has become such a liability to the NFL's image that the league needs to intervene in some way, whether through formal review of his stewardship, through pressure to make organizational changes, or in extreme scenarios, through mechanisms that could force him to sell. Those mechanisms are complex and rarely used, requiring supermajority votes from other owners and findings of conduct detrimental to the league. But sources say the Teller situation, combined with everything else that's happened in Cleveland recently, the Ronnie Hickman attack, the Myles Garrett situation, the constant coaching turnover, the Deshaun Watson disaster, has created enough concern that informal discussions about potential intervention are happening. The Cleveland Browns issued a statement about Teller's departure that was remarkably brief and corporate, saying only that the team and Teller's representatives were unable to reach agreement on a contract extension and that the organization wishes Teller well. What the statement didn't address was the confrontation between Haslam and Teller, the accusations Haslam made, or the circumstances that led to Teller walking out. That omission was immediately noted by reporters who started asking follow-up questions about what really happened, and while the Browns have declined to elaborate beyond the statement, sources inside the organization have been talking to trusted media members, and the story of Haslam's meeting with Teller is spreading rapidly. Wyatt Teller himself has not made a public statement yet, but according to sources close to him, he's consulted with attorneys about whether Haslam's comments during that meeting constitute defamation or create grounds for a grievance against the team. The specific allegations Haslam made about Teller's effort and commitment, if they were made without factual basis, as sources say they were, could potentially be actionable, particularly if they damage Teller's reputation or affect his ability to sign with another team at fair market value. Sources say Teller hasn't decided yet whether to pursue legal action, but he's preserving his options and documenting everything that happened in case he needs it later. The trade market for Wyatt Teller is expected to be robust, given that he's one of the best guards in football and is still in his prime at 29 years old. According to sources, multiple teams have already reached out to the Browns to inquire about Teller's availability, and the Browns are expected to field offers over the next few days. But the trade compensation the Browns receive, according to sources familiar with these situations, will likely be less than what Teller is actually worth, because other teams know that Cleveland has destroyed its relationship with him and has limited leverage to hold out for maximum value. This is a pattern that's repeated itself in Cleveland, where the Browns create dysfunction with good players, those players demand out, and the Browns then have to trade them for less than market value, because everyone knows the situation is toxic. The broader implications of losing Wyatt Teller go beyond just the immediate impact on the offensive line. This is yet another example of the Browns failing to retain homegrown talent, failing to reward players who perform at elite levels, and failing to create an environment where star players want to stay long-term. Every time something like this happens, it makes it harder to convince free agents to sign with Cleveland, harder to convince draft picks that Cleveland is a good destination, and harder to convince current players like Myles Garrett that the organization is capable of building a winner. The cumulative effect of years of this kind of dysfunction is that the Browns have to overpay to attract talent and struggle to keep the talent they develop, which creates a competitive disadvantage that no amount of draft picks or coaching changes can overcome, as long as the ownership situation remains the same. As of now, Thursday, February 19, 2026, Wyatt Teller is no longer a Cleveland Brown in any meaningful sense, even if he's technically still under contract. His agent is actively working to facilitate a trade to get him out of Cleveland as quickly as possible. Jimmy Haslam is facing more intense criticism than at any point in his 14 years as owner, with legitimate questions being raised about whether he's fit to continue owning an NFL franchise. And the Cleveland Browns are once again the most dysfunctional organization in professional sports, having managed to turn what should have been a straightforward contract extension with a Pro Bowl player into another public relations disaster that damages the franchise's reputation and competitive prospects. The NFL world is watching, and the reaction isn't sympathy. It's rage, disgust, and growing demands that something has to change in Cleveland before this franchise is destroyed beyond repair.